Hi, and thank you for watching us here at Tax Talk UK, where we talk about all things tax and consider other important aspects of working for yourself, being self-employed, running a small business. So today I'm going to pick up some more queries on the VAT margin scheme and specifically the application and the accounting of additional costs and the impact that errors make on your overall VAT liability. So before I talk about that, if I could please ask you to take a moment to subscribe to our YouTube channel. That way you'll easily be able to refer back to this information if you should need to, as well as being able to access the other information that we have available on a whole host of different topics, all aimed at supporting you in your self-employment. If you navigate to the playlist section of our YouTube channel, you will see the topics all loosely catalogued into topics and trading styles to help you find the information that's going to be relevant to you. So back then to the VAT margin scheme and the accounting for additional costs and how to treat them. So specifically, I've seen a lot of queries about can I reclaim the VAT on the additional costs, or should I be including it in the purchase cost? And I'm just going to work through some examples to show you that actually in the scenario when you can reclaim the VAT on the additional cost, making an error doesn't actually impact your overall liability, when the impact on your liability comes when you incorrectly treat a non-VATable additional cost. So what I want to do is just to work through an example, a couple of scenarios, just to highlight to you the impact of incorrectly treating additional costs and how that impacts on your liability, so that you can have a good understanding of when of what the impact of making an error would be, and when this is going to affect your liability. So in the example that I'm going to use today, we have made a purchase of an item of £1,000, and then we have then gone on to make a sale of that item for £2,500. So in that example, the margin on that transaction for the purposes of the VAT margin scheme is £1,500, and using the VAT fraction, which I've explained in other videos how to apply that, so I won't go into detail in that aspect, but the VAT on that calculation would be £250. So we would be liable to HMRC for VAT of £250 in this transaction. So let's then factor in an additional cost. So we purchased the item for £1,000, but we had to spend £600 on a repair in order to achieve that sale of £2,500. So that is an additional cost. So it wouldn't correctly be treated as part of the VAT margin calculation. It would be treated as a separate transaction in its own right. And if all the criteria was met, then the same as any other transaction, we would be able to reclaim the VAT in this scenario that we had paid of £100. So that repair cost of £600 was £500 plus £100 VAT, and we're going to be able to claim the £100 VAT that we've paid. So you can see in this scenario that we have £250 liability from our calculation of our sale and calculation of the using the VAT margin scheme, and then we're going to then reclaim in a separate transaction £100 VAT, giving the total VAT liability £150. So the total amount that we will be paying to HMRC across all of the boxes from the transactions involved in this scenario would be £150. Now let's look what happens if we incorrectly include that £600 repair cost in our VAT margin calculation. So now we're still saying that the sale is £2,500 because that's what we sold it for, but now we're incorrectly using the purchase cost of £1,600 because we've taken the £1,000 actual purchase cost and incorrectly included the £600 repair cost. So now when we use those figures, we now have a margin of £900 for the calculation, and applying the VAT fraction, that gives us VAT liability of £150. So highlighting across the two calculations, you can see that whether we correctly isolate the additional cost and treat that as a separate transaction, or we incorrectly include it in the purchase cost, you can see that in both of the examples, we actually end up with the same liability to HMRC. So we've gone the wrong way about the calculation, but we have got the right result. So much as we obviously should be always striving to use the correct methods and apply the correct rules, if we did make this mistake in a scenario where there was VAT able to be reclaimed on the additional cost, we wouldn't actually be impacting our liability to HMRC. We would be still paying the correct amount. So now I'm going to look at the same example, but a different scenario. So in this scenario, we're going to use the same original figure. So the purchase cost of £1,000, the sale of £2,500, giving us a margin of £1,500. Applying the VAT fraction gives us VAT liability of £250. But in this scenario, we're still going to spend £600 on the repair, but in this scenario, there's no VAT on that repair. So when we correctly treat that additional cost separately, there's no VAT for us to reclaim. So still across all of the boxes that these transactions cover, our liability is going to be £250. So now let's look what happens if we incorrectly include that repair cost in the calculation of the margin. So now we have a purchase cost of £1,600 and a sale of £2,500. So we have a margin of £900, and applying the VAT fraction, that gives us a total liability to HMRC of £150. So across all of the boxes that are included, our total liability, if we incorrectly included that additional cost in as a purchase cost, as part of the purchase cost, would give us a liability of £150. So now we can see, when we look at the impact of both of these methods, that actually in this scenario where there was no VAT able to reclaim on the additional cost, if we incorrectly include it in the purchase cost, then in that scenario, we're actually going to be understating our VAT liability, because when we use the correct method of treating the additional cost separately, we had a VAT liability of £250. But when we incorrectly included that additional cost as part of the purchase cost, then this gave us a liability of £150. So in that scenario, we have understated our liability. So hopefully this helps you to understand that much as we should always be using the correct methods, it's not actually when there's VAT able to reclaim on the additional cost that is the biggest concern, because actually whether we correctly account for it as an additional cost and treat that transaction separately, or incorrectly include it in the purchase cost, actually the liability to HMRC remains the same. It's when there's no VAT on that additional cost that actually we will be, by making the mistake of including in the purchase cost, we would actually be impacting our liability, which obviously is a far greater impact and error that actually gives the wrong liability. So hopefully that this helps you to understand the impact of getting it wrong, and why it is really important that you do understand what is the purchase cost and what is an additional cost, and you treat them accordingly and correctly. So thank you very much for watching. As I mentioned before, please do take a moment to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you find the content useful, please do also hit the like button. Thank you. Goodbye.